I'm Mareka from My Creative Quilts, and today I want to talk to you about long arm quilting. When we buy our frames, we buy the frame that fits our room. I have a small frame. I have only an 8-foot Continuum frame because that's all I could fit in here. But that limits the amount of space I have to quilt. So I've been quilting a lot of lap size quilts, baby quilts, and even single quilts. But when I want to get to a queen or a king, that doesn't quite fit. I don't have enough quilting space. So you have to be imaginative. Now, I'm doing a king size quilt right now, and it's not easy. There's a lot of moving around of the fabric and of the backing and making sure the backing isn't pleated and gathered. It's quite the endeavor. So it's not something I'd recommend doing very often, but it is possible, and I wanted to show you how I did it. So over the course of the next few days, I'm going to be making various videos and then putting them all together into one so you can see how I do it. There might be a much easier way. If there is, I would really like to know about it. I've learned what doesn't work, and I've learned what's working for me now. So let me show you what I've done. This is my frame. As you can see, it just fits in my room. Okay, it's 8 feet long. Usually you can buy the Continuum frame from the Grace Company 10 feet, 12 feet, and then, so I bought the 10 feet one and we took, I bought the 10 feet one and we took it apart and made it 8 feet. So originally when I loaded this quilt, I divided it into thirds. I had 1/3 here. I had this folded over for 1/3, this end, and then I folded this over to one end. Now, the first row, the first pass went perfectly. There was no problems. The problem started when I started rolling up the quilt, when I started rolling this part up. Because this was thicker on this side, the backing rolled up faster on the side than it did in the middle. So what happened was I would get it very taut on both ends, but the middle was a big, huge sag. So I tried all different things, and I ended up pulling out a lot of stitches because I was getting pleats. I did get one pleat that I couldn't get rid of, so I just sewed it down. When everything's finished, you won't see it. But I knew I couldn't do that because I figured as the more I advanced the quilt, the more it would be like that. So I ended up taking it off the frame completely. It was partly quilted. I had the middle part done several blocks. So I took it apart and I shifted it over. I figured it would be easier if I focused on a side. So maybe I should do like a half instead of doing a third. And it works better. It's still not great. There's still a lot of problems, but it's doable. Okay, so what I ended up doing is a little bit unorthodox because some people may not approve of what I did, but it's working, so that's what counts, right? So as you can see, my backing is not rolled up like it should be because that wasn't working. So what I did was I individually pinned. Can you see the pins underneath there? I pulled the backing as taut as I could without being ridiculous, and I pinned it there. And then of course I had my clamps. And so now this is really nice and taut. So then I pulled my batting, I straightened it out nicely like that, and then I pinned my I pinned the front down the same way. I pulled it taut. Now it does get a little bit ruffly, so I need to adjust that as I move along. And then I also use a rice bag and a can to give me extra tension. So if it's very wobbly, I'll put this rice bag on the quilt and it gives me a harder surface, a more smooth surface. You can also use a can. A lot of people use cans, and there. So what I might do is just smooth this out. So this is the next section to be quilted. I would put this on one side or this on the other, or depending on where the ruffling is, I might put the rice bag here on the edge. But what it does is it gives me enough tension, and it also gives more tension on the bottom as well. So that's how I've been managing. And then when I finish quilting along this side, I just advance it and continue. Now the middle, I only quilted to here. As you can see, it's undone. It's not done all the way down. So once I've matched up and done all my quilting, so I've got one more row to do here to match up. And then what I'll do is I'll just be quilting from the center of the quilt out. Now after every row, I go look at my back, and that's really important. So if you look underneath, you can check to see how taut it is. You can just give it a look. Like right now it's not taut because it's not pinned down. But you just feel underneath it And if you feel bubbles, then you know you need to fix it. And so that's what I do after every pass. Here's another little bit of a wrinkle. We'll see if it needs to be sewn down. It's not going to be perfect. It can't be, unfortunately. But it's really going a lot better than I thought it would. Oh, I mean, what can you do, right? You have to work with what you have. I'm back. Since I showed you how I had the quilt on the frame, I have finished quilting along the right side. So now I moved it so that we're going to quilt the left. So I'm going to show you what I did. I quilted the first couple of rows on the left-hand side. I'm going to show you how I remove it and how I repin it. So here we go. So here we are. And as you can see, the quilt is all pulled on the bottom, so you have to make sure your floor is clean. I don't have any pets anymore, so that's not a problem. So this was where I was quilting when I first started this video. This is the side that is now done. As you can see, the tension is good. I'm happy with it. Believe me, with all the problems I had with loading this and moving it and everything, I am very happy at the tension on the back of the quilting. So I took it off completely and then I moved it over, and now I am working on this side. As you can see, I already quilted the first row here. So now what I need to do is move it up. Before I move it up, I want to show you how it's pinned and how to remove it. I'm going to try and show you without blocking too much. So I had just taken the pins off. It was pinned down to help keep this taut. And as you can see, I pinned down the backing. Normally the backing is rolled up, right? In this case it doesn't work because, as I already explained, if the back is rolled up, as you're rolling the quilt, as you're advancing it, the ends are too thick and they're pulling on it. So I found that that's not possible. So what I do now is I pin the backing to the leaders. And there we go. It's easier to keep it taut, and I find it works for me. So now that I've done that, I've released it all. Double check for pins. Make sure I haven't. Yeah, so there we go. So now I am going to advance it. On the Continuum frame, the wheel is here. So I'm just going to release the wheels, and I'm going to start advancing it. Now this is where it can get, in the beginning it's not too hard because it's not tight, but it gets really a little bit, take a little bit more effort once you get down to the bottom of the quilt, but it still works. So I'm just going to advance it a little bit. I like to try and get the full square in the range of my sewing machine. As I get to the end, it's not really possible because the quilt starts to build up too much on the roll, but otherwise, you know, up until about then it works. So I'm just going to move this up, and I'm just going to check. So I'm going to be quilting this row next. So I want to make sure that the machine can reach the top row. So now I'm going to lock it. And this is okay. No problems there. And now comes the tricky part, but you can do it. If you benefit from my experience, you won't have to go through all the issues that I had. Okay, so I've quilted up until here. So I only have these rows to finish. So I pull this back gently. I don't want to break any of my stitches. I pull back my batting, and then I pull this taut. Okay, now this bottom roller is not fastened yet. I haven't locked it on the wheel. So, and then I have my leader so that I have a little bit of space. Now I don't want too much, just a little bit. So I make sure my batting is nice and taut, put on my clamps, and I feel underneath. This is important. I feel underneath because, oh, see, I feel there's a good bump there, so I have to make sure I pull that because that's where the wrinkles come in. So now I've pulled this. Now this is where it's important that you use a high quality backing, If you're going to be using a cheaper backing, it might not tolerate all the pins that you're going to put in as you roll the quilt up, considering how much it's pulling on the backing. Traditionally, when you have your backing rolled up, the pressure is on the very end, which is not going to be part of the quilt. This is going to be part of the quilt. So you have to make sure that the backing that you pick is a good quality cotton that won't get damaged. So I reach underneath from the middle or from the closest to the stitching. So I'm holding on to the, I don't know if you can tell, I'm holding on to the leader. I pull this taut, and then I take my pin and I just go through the backing. It's a little awkward to do it from this angle. I usually do it from the other angle. Put it through there. There we go. Then I do it again. And then I just keep going along until it's done. There, the pinning is done. Okay. So that's what it looks like. So now I make sure that the batting is smooth. Because of all the stretching and pulling and tugging that I had to do when I was figuring out how to do this, I did get a few holes in the batting because I got a little enthusiastic. So what I did was I just cut out a corner. I used some spray baster, sprayed the backing, put the batting on top, and the hole was healed. Okay, so you make sure this is smooth, especially closer to the stitching. And I go behind and I look underneath to see if it's smooth. It's mostly smooth, not 100%, so we're gonna have to work on that a little bit. But I wait until I have this smooth. So there we go, now I smooth this down. Okay, so now I reach underneath. And I smooth, what I'm doing is I'm putting my hand against the backing from the last stitch, and I'm smoothing it down with my hand on top, like this. And what that does is it helps me get rid of any wrinkles up at the top. So I hold it, just do it again. There we go. And then I just put in a pin here. Actually, I should do it from that side down. I just don't want to block you from. All right, I've switched sides, and I'm going to try and show you the proper way here. Get my hand underneath. Okay, now I'm pulling the backing down along with my hand, pinching it, and then I'm doing my pin. There we go, that's nice and smooth. And I'll do it again right to the end. Okay, that part's pinned. And you also want to make sure you've pinned your side. I haven't been consistent about basting the sides because I'm pinning it, but you can baste it, it's up to you. Okay, so that's fairly taut. Now you can see that there's a bit of a bubble here, so I'm just going to rework it. I'm going to take the pins out, rework it a little bit until I get it as best as I can be. If there are still some bubbles or wrinkles here, there's a few ways you can help deal it. I'll show you that in a minute. Okay, so my pinning is done. Let's pretend this is all nice and smooth. Then I make sure again, because sometimes, yeah, see, it's not quite smooth enough. There's still a little bit of a wrinkle, so I just found it and I just repin it like that. Okay, and now I'm going to tighten it. See, now I see that there's a bit more wrinkles, so I'm going to work on that a little bit. Now, sometimes you can't get rid of the wrinkles or the bubbles at all. So there's a few ways I deal with that. One is I try and use weight. Some people use cans, some people use rice bags, anything heavy that won't damage your quilt can be used. So what you're doing is you're moving your machine over, and then you're placing the weight on each side of the quilt, and that often can smooth out a lot of the bubbles. So here there's a little bit of a bubble here. I put this here and I put this here. Then when I'm quilting, with my hand, I make sure it's smooth, and usually that's all you need. Another thing you can do is you can spray it with water and then take your iron on steam and just lightly go over it. You're not pressing on it obviously, but you're lightly going over it, and that will often shrink it just enough that your bubbles are out. The other thing you could do is put extra starch or best press or whatever it is that you use. But so, yeah, that's about it for the bubbles. If you find after you've locked your wheel and you've tightened it, it's still not completely wrinkle free underneath, then you need to do it over again. But I found that with practice, the last few times I haven't had to do that. So I'm just going to take one more look at the back. This is the really important part. Yep, that's nice and smooth now. So I'm just going to get busy on quilting it. I'm going to quilt from here out because that's where the quilting is. And that's how I keep it steady. It's a little unorthodox not having the backing rolled up, but like I said, that really made it much more difficult, and I found that my way makes it smoother. So I'm going to do some more quilting, and then I'll get back to you when it's finished. For the last part of the video, I want to show you that it's finished, that I have finished quilting the piece. I hope you didn't get too seasick with some of the movement that I was making in the beginning of the video in particular. Usually I have my camera on a stand, and I was trying to do it free-handed so I could give you close-ups, and unfortunately I didn't realize quite how much I was moving the camera, so I do apologize for that. Anyway, so I wanted to show you the completed quilt, and here it is. I just finished it last night. I'm very happy with it. I am a bit of a perfectionist, so some of the issues that I had bother me a little. The person I'm selling this to who commissioned it, I'm actually giving her a discount because I had never done a king-size quilt on this frame, so I didn't feel it was fair to charge full price for something I was trying. So I'm glad. I don't feel quite as bad with the few of the little imperfections that I found. And as most of us quilters, we know, we're harder on our work than we are on somebody else's, so my imperfections probably might not even be noticed by anybody. So as you can see, it's all done. The backing turned out quite well. You can see that I used meandering for the focus fabrics, and I did a grid on the alternate blocks. Now, what I meant by imperfections is there were some spots where I just couldn't avoid having bubbles, especially in the beginning when I was still doing it with 1/3 and 1/3. So the bigger ones I took out, the smaller ones I'm going to stitch down. There's a few smaller ones here. Let me see if I can find one of the bigger ones. Now see, now that I'm looking for one of the bigger ones, I can't find it, so maybe it's not as obvious as I feared. That one. There we go. Here's one. See, I'm going to sew that down. And here's another one. See, there are a few, but unfortunately, it really can't be helped. What's going to happen is when this is washed, it'll get all nice and fluffy. And so now I just have to trim it off, put on the binding. I'm calling it the Beast right now. It's pretty big. This kind of quilting, unfortunately, I don't think you can do it with a panto. And I don't know about computerized because of the way you have to shift it. But anyway, this just shows you that you can do a bigger quilt on a smaller frame. So that's it. It's very doable. It's definitely a challenge. I won't be making a lot of king size or queen size quilts on this frame, but it's definitely nice to know that you can do it if you have to. Many of us can't have the big quilting frames of our dreams, and we have to make do with what we have. Knowing how to do it, knowing that you can do it is really fun. So if you decide you want to try to make a bigger quilt on your smaller frame, Make sure, take your time. There's no rush, or hopefully there's no rush. You might have a deadline if it's for a specific occasion, but try to take your time. Take out the stitches if you make a mistake, pin and repin until you get the back as smoothly as you can. Remember to use a high quality backing because it's going to be going through a lot more stress than it usually does during the quilting process. Other than that, I say go for it. I think it's great that we can do these things and we can share things. So if you do make a quilt, I'd love to see a photo of it. If you have any questions of the process, leave a message, or maybe you have a better way of doing things, and I'd love to hear that too, because I'm all about learning how to do things in a better way. So if you'd like to learn more about quilting, I have quite a few videos on my channel, so subscribe to my channel. And I also have my website at mycreativequilts.com, where you'll find a blog with lots of different posts on quilting topics, and some not quilting topics too, depends on the mood I'm in. And there's also videos there and lots of things that you might want to learn. So that's it for now, and hope I'll see you again.